Okay, so you want to own an NFL stadium. Buy a piece of land, pour some concrete, put in some seats, watch the ticket money roll in on game days. Sounds straightforward enough. Maybe you've been to a game, looked around at 70,000 people, done a quick calculation in your head. 70,000 tickets, $150 each. That's $10.5 million in a single afternoon. 8 home games per season. That's $84 million. Sounds like the greatest business in professional sports. It is not that simple. And by the time we're done here, you're going to understand exactly why owning an NFL stadium is one of the most complex and most misunderstood financial operations in the history of American sports. Because the real story isn't about how much money comes in, it's about who actually pays for the building. And the answer is going to surprise you. Most people, when they think about NFL stadium costs, think about the field, the seats, the scoreboard, the bowl. What they don't think about is the land, the underground infrastructure, the retractable roof, the high-density Wi-Fi system capable of supporting 70,000 simultaneous connections, the luxury suite kitchens with 5-star catering equipment, the LED display systems wrapping the entire interior, the dedicated broadcast compound wired for every major television network, and the highway interchanges your city government is going to make you fund as a condition of getting planning permission. SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, home of the Rams and the Chargers, opened in 2020. It cost $5.5 billion, not a typo. $5,500 million for one building. That is more than the annual government budget of some small countries. And SoFi is the most expensive stadium ever built. But it is not an outlier. It is just the furthest point on a curve that has been moving in one direction for 30 years. AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, home of the Dallas Cowboys, opened in 2009 with a final price tag of $1.3 billion, after originally being budgeted at $650 million. MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, where the Giants and Jets play, cost $1.6 billion when it opened in 2010. Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas came in between $1.9 and $2.3 billion. The new Highmark Stadium for the Buffalo Bills started at a $1.4 billion budget and has already climbed to $2.2 billion before it has hosted a single game. And the costs most people never consider. The land alone in a major American city can run hundreds of millions before a single yard of concrete is poured. The retractable roof, which every modern NFL stadium now requires to host concerts in the rain and create the controlled environment premium clients expect, is a precision engineering project involving thousands of tons of moving steel on industrial rail systems. SoFi's roof and shade structure alone cost over $400 million. None of this is optional. None of it is cheap. And none of it generates a single dollar of revenue on its own. So by the time you cut the ribbon, before a single ticket has been scanned, you have spent somewhere between $1.5 billion and $5.5 billion. And that is just to get in the door. Now, most people assume the next step is simple. Find investors, get a loan, open the doors. What almost nobody outside the sports business world understands is that the way NFL stadiums actually get paid for is one of the most controversial arrangements in American public finance. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. The capitalization structure of a modern NFL stadium looks something like this. The ownership group puts in whatever direct equity they have, personal investment, cash from selling other assets, pre-sales of personal seat licenses before construction begins. Then they borrow the rest, and the rest is usually most of it. MetLife Stadium in New Jersey is the cleanest example of pure private financing. The Giants and Jets formed a 50-50 joint venture, wrote the checks themselves, and opened a $1.6 billion stadium without a single dollar of public money. It is one of only 3 or 4 NFL stadiums in the entire league financed entirely by private capital. SoFi Stadium follows a similar model. Stan Kroenke funded the $5.5 billion project primarily through personal equity and an NFL loan program with minimal public contribution, which sounds admirable until you realize these are 2 of the wealthiest ownership groups in American sports, operating in 2 of the largest media markets in the world, with revenue streams that most NFL owners could never access. For everyone else, the other 28 or so franchises, the financing equation looks fundamentally different. and it involves a mechanism that most taxpayers have never heard of, never voted for directly, and would be furious about if they fully understood it. But before we get to that, you need to understand the leverage that makes the whole system possible. Because the public money doesn't flow because cities are naive. It flows because NFL ownership groups hold a card that no other business in America has access to. Most people assume a football team is tied to its city the way a hospital or a school is tied to its community. It is not going anywhere. It cannot just leave. That assumption is wrong, and the NFL has spent 50 years proving it. The Raiders moved from Oakland to Las Vegas. The Rams moved from St. Louis to Los Angeles. The Chargers moved from San Diego to Los Angeles. The Browns moved from Cleveland to Baltimore and became the Ravens. In each case, a franchise that had been part of a city's identity for decades simply left, legally, permanently, and profitably. This is the card, the credible, legally permissible, repeatedly executed threat to relocate. And when an NFL ownership group tells a city, "We need a new stadium or we will consider our options," they are not bluffing. They are describing a scenario that every mayor and governor in an NFL city has studied, that has happened multiple times in living memory, and that nobody in elected office wants to be responsible for allowing to happen on their watch. The city of Oakland lost its Raiders. San Diego lost its Chargers. St. Louis lost its Rams. In each case, the cultural and economic loss was immediate, visible, and irreversible. And that is precisely why cities pay. Now here's what happens when they do, and this is where the numbers get uncomfortable. More than $10.6 billion in public money, taxpayer money, has been spent financing NFL stadiums currently in use across the league. $10 billion of public funds. That went into building facilities which are then operated for private profit by some of the wealthiest ownership groups in American sports. Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas cost approximately $2 billion. Of that, $750 million came from a hotel tax in Clark County, meaning every visitor who stayed in a Las Vegas hotel for years contributed involuntarily to building a stadium for the Raiders. The remaining $1.25 billion came from the Raiders through loans and seat license sales. Here's the twist that most people never hear. The city of Las Vegas, the entity that contributed $750 million, receives neither rent nor a share of stadium revenues. Not $1. The legal structure of the municipal bonds used to finance the public contribution prohibits direct revenue sharing in a way that would compromise the bond's tax-exempt status. The city gets indirect economic benefits: tourism, surrounding tax receipts, jobs. The stadium profits go entirely to the Raiders. The public paid a third of the bill. The public gets none of the upside. Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta goes even further. The official public contribution was announced at $200 million, a number that made reasonable headlines at the time. What didn't get the same coverage was that independent analyses, including a detailed investigation by The Guardian, estimated the true public cost when including financing charges and long-term maintenance commitments exceeded $700 million. The stadium is owned by the state of Georgia. AMB Group, Arthur Blank's ownership entity, operates it and keeps all operating profits. And AMB Group pays no property tax on the building. Zero property tax on a stadium worth over $1.5 billion, in the center of one of America's fastest-growing cities. And then there is the Buffalo Bills situation, the single most dramatic example of public stadium financing in NFL history. Total project cost, $2.2 billion. The state of New York is contributing $600 million. Erie County is contributing $250 million. Combined public contribution, $850 million, the largest public investment in a single NFL stadium ever made. Under the lease terms, the state of New York will own the stadium and is contractually obligated to pay all maintenance and repair costs for the duration of the lease. The public owns the building. The public pays for its upkeep. The Bills operate it and keep the revenues. But here's the thing that most people miss when they feel the appropriate outrage at these numbers. The ownership groups didn't design this system out of arrogance. They designed it out of leverage. Leverage that the relocation threat makes possible. And once you understand that, you start to understand what happens when the financing mechanism breaks down and what that costs the people who were promised it would work. The U.S. Bank Stadium in Minneapolis is the case study that nobody learned from. The state of Minnesota committed $498 million in public funds to build the Vikings' new home. The plan was to fund this through a new tax on electronic pull-tab gambling machines in bars and restaurants across the state, projected to generate $35 million per year. In year one, it generated less than $2 million, 95% below projections. The state had to find emergency replacement financing while the stadium was already under construction. The commitment was made. The revenue to honor it never arrived. This is what public stadium financing actually looks like in practice. Not corruption, not incompetence, just the gap between optimistic projections and economic reality, a gap that the public always absorbs and the franchise never does. Now, let's talk about what the revenue side actually looks like once the building is open, because this is where most people's understanding of stadium economics falls completely apart. Tickets, 70,000 seats, 8 home games. Average NFL ticket price in 2025 runs between $136 and $156. Call it $145. That's $10.15 million per game. $81 million across a full home schedule. That's real money. But here's what that number hides. First, the NFL only plays 8 home games per season. 8. That is less than any other major professional sports league in North America. An NHL team plays 41 home games. An MLB team plays 81. An NFL team plays 8. And for those 8 games, the stadium must generate enough revenue to justify a building that cost over $2 billion to construct. Second, every game night costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to operate before you count a single football-related expense. Security for 70,000 people, medical teams on standby, cleaning crews, broadcast infrastructure, operations staff across every concourse and concession point. The NFL requires visiting teams to receive a share of gate receipts under league revenue-sharing rules. Revenue you see at the top of the income statement is not revenue that hits your bank account. And third, the empty seat problem. An NFL seat that goes unsold doesn't just cost you the ticket price. The average NFL fan attending a game spends an additional $40 to $85 on parking, concessions, and merchandise beyond the face value of their ticket. A stadium with 10,000 unsold seats doesn't lose $1.45 million per game in ticket revenue. It loses closer to $2.3 million when you count the ancillary spending that never happened. Across 8 home games, that gap becomes a number that materially changes your annual income statement. The franchises that understand this don't maximize ticket prices. They maximize attendance. A full stadium at $130 average generates more total revenue than a 70% full stadium at $180, because the warm body in the seat is as valuable as the ticket itself. But here's what almost nobody watching an NFL game from their couch has ever considered. The 70,000 people in the general seating bowl are not where the serious money is made. The serious money is made in a part of the stadium that most fans never enter and never think about. Most people assume all 70,000 seats are created roughly equal, some closer to the field, some higher up, but fundamentally the same experience at different price points. They are not looking at the right part of the building, the suites, the premium tier, the 10 to 15% of the stadium that generates roughly half of all game day revenue. AT&T Stadium has luxury suites renting for between $12,000 and $50,000 per game. The Hall of Fame suite, their most exclusive space, costs $50,000 for a single game for 30 guests. Mercedes-Benz Stadium runs from $10,000 to $40,000 per game, scaling to $125,000 for marquee events like the Super Bowl or the SEC Championship. SoFi Stadium's premium inventory starts at $8,000 and reaches $100,000 per game depending on the matchup. These are not single-game purchases for most buyers. They are multi-year contracts, 3, 5, sometimes 10 years, signed by corporations for client entertainment, executive rewards, and relationship building that cannot happen in a conference room. And here's what that structure means financially. While ticket revenue swings with your team's performance, bad season, early playoff exit, fan patience wearing thin, suite revenue does not swing. It is contracted, legally binding. The corporate client who signed a 5-year suite agreement in 2022 is still paying that invoice in 2026, regardless of what your quarterback did last Sunday. The suite buyer is not buying football. They are buying access, exclusivity, and an environment in which to put their most important clients. That is a business expense, often partially tax-deductible, approved by the CFO, not the fan in Section 312. And it renews on a business logic entirely separate from wins and losses. For the highest revenue NFL stadiums, AT&T, SoFi, Mercedes-Benz, premium and hospitality revenue doesn't just supplement ticket income, it rivals it. And it does so with a predictability and stability the ticket business can never match. But even with suites fully leased on multi-year contracts, even with 70,000 fans in seats 8 Sundays a year, there is a revenue stream that generates tens of millions of dollars every single year for doing absolutely nothing. No staff, no event, no game required, just 2 words on the outside of your building. Every time a broadcaster says SoFi Stadium, a fintech company gets global advertising reach. Every time a journalist types Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the German automaker appears in sports sections, business coverage, travel guides, and Google Maps results, simultaneously across millions of searches, without buying a single ad unit. Most people think naming rights are a vanity deal. A corporation pays to put their name on a building and gets a plaque and some tickets. That is not what naming rights actually are. They are the most efficient advertising purchase in American sports. And the NFL leads the entire sports world in monetizing them. SoFi's naming rights deal, signed in 2019, is worth more than $20 million per year over a 20-year term. Mercedes-Benz Stadium's naming arrangement is valued at $324 million over 27 years, approximately $12 million annually. Across the entire NFL, naming rights spending has reached close to $900 million annually across the league. The average deal is worth nearly $10 million per year. The top deals are worth double and triple that. Why do corporations pay? Because the NFL broadcast footprint is the largest in American sports. Every game draws millions of television viewers. Every stadium exterior shot shows the corporate name. Every sports radio mention, every social media post, every fan checking directions on their phone. The name appears. It is advertising that cannot be skipped, cannot be muted, and is associated with the most loyal, emotionally engaged, and high-spending consumer demographic in American entertainment. The naming rights check arrives whether your team goes 14-3 or 3-14. It is the purest form of passive income in professional sports. But naming rights alone, as large as they are, cannot solve the structural problem that defines NFL stadium economics more than any other. The problem that separates the stadiums that thrive from the ones that quietly struggle. The problem of what you do with a $2 billion building during the 357 days of the year when there is no football being played. Here's the number that should make every NFL stadium owner uncomfortable the moment they sign the ownership papers. 8 home games. In a building that costs $2 billion to construct, employs hundreds of full-time staff, carries tens of millions in annual debt service, and exists 365 days a year with a fixed cost base that does not care whether your team is in the playoffs or rebuilding around a rookie quarterback. Most people assume the stadium sits empty between games and the cost is manageable. It is not. The building's fixed costs, debt service, insurance, year-round staff, maintenance, run continuously. The revenue has to come from somewhere besides 8 Sundays. SoFi Stadium understood this before it opened. The building was designed as the centerpiece of Hollywood Park, a 300-acre mixed-use development in Inglewood with offices, retail, a hotel, a casino, and a residential district that generates revenue 365 days a year, regardless of what the Rams and Chargers do on Sundays. Beyoncé's Renaissance World Tour residency at SoFi generated $55.7 million from a single run of concert dates. Not per year, per residency. One artist. $55.7 million. That is two-thirds of what the entire NFL home schedule might generate in raw ticket revenue. AT&T Stadium in Arlington has hosted WrestleMania, NBA All-Star Games, Final Four, NCAA tournaments, boxing cards, and a continuous calendar of events that make it one of the busiest large venue facilities in Texas year-round. Jerry Jones and the Cowboys organization operate the building in full, and that operational control over the non-football calendar is worth hundreds of millions over the stadium's lifetime. The NFL stadiums that underperform financially are almost universally the ones built in markets without the population density, entertainment infrastructure, and corporate base to support a robust non-football event calendar. The building is the same. The market around it determines whether it thrives or bleeds, and the building has costs that run whether the calendar is full or empty. Costs that don't appear in the press release and that most first-time operators dramatically underestimate until the invoices start arriving. You've seen the revenues now. Tickets, suites, naming rights, concerts. The numbers look substantial on paper. Now let's open the other side of the ledger. A modern NFL stadium uses between 10 and 20 million kilowatt hours of electricity per year. On a single game day, lighting, HVAC running for 70,000 people. Scoreboards, concession kitchens, broadcast compound, point-of-sale terminals processing thousands of simultaneous transactions. The building burns through 60,000 to 100,000 kilowatt hours in roughly 10 hours, the equivalent of an entire residential neighborhood's monthly electricity consumption, compressed into a single afternoon. The turf, a natural grass NFL field, requires replacement every 1 to 3 seasons at up to $1.5 million per installation, and the artificial turf surfaces many franchises use instead require significant capital expenditure every 8 to 10 years. Insurance on a structure worth over $2 billion, operating in a high-occupancy public environment across hundreds of events annually, runs into the millions every year. Year-round staff, facilities engineers, IT specialists, operations personnel, commercial teams are on full-time contracts paid in February when the building has been dark for weeks. The Highmark Stadium situation makes the maintenance number concrete. At the Bills' previous stadium, Erie County was paying between $10.7 and $12.6 million per year in operations and maintenance costs, with approximately $2.6 million annually in capital maintenance alone. This on an aging stadium far simpler than what modern NFL facilities require. The maintenance obligation on a $2.2 billion building engineered to 2026 specifications is categorically different. None of these costs are individually catastrophic. Together, against a debt service obligation that does not adjust for your team's win-loss record or your city's economic climate, they represent the fixed base your revenue must exceed before you make a single dollar of actual profit. And there is one mechanism embedded in every major stadium financing agreement that can take all of these pressures and compress them into a genuine crisis, faster than any single bad season ever could. Most stadium owners don't fully understand it until they are already inside it. This is the part that is written into the fine print of every construction loan and never mentioned at the ribbon cutting. Stadium financing is governed by strict legal contracts called debt covenants. These covenants require the borrower to maintain specific financial health ratios. The most common, the debt service coverage ratio, means your operating cash flows must remain at a certain multiple of your annual debt repayments. If revenue falls below the threshold, your lender can step up your interest rate by 1 to 3%, restrict your operational spending, demand additional collateral, or in extreme cases, call the entire outstanding balance immediately due. What triggers this in an NFL context? 2 consecutive seasons missing the playoffs in a revenue-sensitive market. A naming rights partner who enters financial distress and renegotiates their deal downward. A major event cancellation that was projected in your annual revenue budget. A broader economic downturn that causes corporate clients to reduce hospitality spending and decline to renew their suite contracts at previous price levels. The revenue base of an NFL stadium is narrower than it appears. 8 home games, a finite suite inventory, 1 naming rights deal, a concert calendar that depends on artists choosing your market over competing venues in other cities. When 3 of those streams underperform in the same fiscal year, against a debt service obligation of $80 to $150 million annually, the covenant conversation begins. And once it begins, it is not easily ended. The U.S. Bank Stadium situation in Minnesota is the warning nobody learned from. The public financing mechanism failed so completely, 95% below revenue projections, that the state had to restructure its contribution in real time while the stadium was under construction, with no fallback plan that anyone had agreed to in advance. The stadium got built, but the financial engineering that was supposed to make it painless turned out to be built on assumptions that had no relationship to what actually happened. That gap between projected revenue and actual revenue in public financing and private financing, in naming rights deals and suite renewal rates, is what NFL stadium finance is actually about. And the people who build their financial structures to survive that gap are the ones who still own their buildings in 20 years. So let's look at what this actually means in two real outcomes. You build in a top 5 NFL market. Your public financing is structured intelligently. A hotel tax, seat license pre-sales, a naming rights deal signed before the building opens. Your suites are fully subscribed on 7-year contracts before the first kickoff. Your naming rights deal comes in at $18 million per year over 20 years. Your team makes the playoffs 4 of the first 6 seasons. Your non-football calendar is robust, 60 events per year, anchored by 3 major concert residencies, a WrestleMania, and a college football playoff game. Your surrounding real estate development, the mixed-use district your stadium anchors, generates $60 million in annual revenue entirely independent of your team's record. Total annual revenue, $350 million to $500 million, debt serviceable. Covenants comfortable, asset appreciating. In 25 years, you own something worth multiples of what it cost to build. And you built it largely with other people's money. The realistic scenario: you build in a mid-size NFL market with an optimistic financing structure. Construction ran 20% over budget. Your team misses the playoffs 3 consecutive seasons. 2 corporate suite clients didn't renew. 1 moved headquarters, 1 cut entertainment spending after a difficult year. Your summer concert bookings came in lighter than projected because 2 major tours chose competing venues in larger markets. Your naming rights deal is up for renewal in a soft sponsorship environment. The new offer is 15% below the previous contract. Your electricity costs increased 22% due to utility rate adjustments. A section of upper deck requires structural remediation, an unbudgeted $8 million capital expense. None of these are catastrophic on their own. Combined in the same 18-month window against a fixed debt service of $100 million per year, you are no longer comfortable. Your coverage ratio has dipped. Your lender has sent a letter. The conversation you hoped would never happen has begun. And the difference between these two outcomes is not the team's record. It is market selection, financing structure, and the discipline to understand from day one what you are actually buying. Which brings us to the real lesson. Here's what you now understand that almost nobody sitting in those 70,000 seats has ever stopped to consider. Owning an NFL stadium is not owning a football building. It is owning one of the most complex pieces of commercial real estate in any American city. A live entertainment venue, a corporate hospitality operation, a naming rights asset, a concert hall, a real estate anchor, and a leveraged position on decades of public generosity. With a professional football franchise as its emotional engine, the team fills 70,000 seats 8 times a year. It creates the tribal attachment that makes an entire city care about what happens inside your building. It is the reason corporations pay $50,000 for a suite on a single Sunday. It is the reason a technology company pays $20 million per year just to have 2 words on the outside of the building. But the football is not the business. The business is everything around it. The naming rights check that arrives whether you win or lose. The suite contract that renews regardless of your record. The concert that sells out because your building is the best large venue in the market. The real estate development that generates revenue because your stadium made the neighborhood worth building. More than $10.6 billion in public money has been poured into NFL stadiums across this country. Only 3 or 4 were built entirely with private funds. That ratio is not an accident, and it is not generosity. It is the product of decades of sophisticated leverage by ownership groups who understood something that their city's politicians understood too late. The stadium is not a gift to the community. The stadium is a machine. And the question is never whether the machine makes money. The question is who it makes money for. Remember that calculation at the beginning? 70,000 seats, $145 average ticket, $10 million in a single afternoon. That number isn't wrong. It's just the first line of a much longer and much more interesting equation. Outfox the system.